Namaste. Welcome to my podcast. How many times have you heard this line? Yaar, Hindus should get their act together. They're not organized. They don't put across their voice in a systematic manner. My personal experience is that it takes a lot of time, energy, money, and dedication to pull something like this off. One has to be persistent. The focus has to be relentless. And very few people have that in them. And I happen to know one such person who has it in him. His name is Hari Kiran Vadlamani. I met Hari Kiranji via Twitter and I've been part of some of the initiatives that he's been taken on for the last few years. Now I'll let you guys know a bit about Hari Kiranji. Hari Kiranji is a Hindu. He's an investor, activist, seeker, and an aspiring artist. He is spiritual, therefore religious. He's a dharmic Indic liberal. Yeah, he calls himself a liberal. He's an activist, not an intellectual. He's an intellectual Kshatriya, not an intellectual Kshatriya. He's a generalist and not a specialist. And he's excited about generating ideas that have a transformational impact. He wants to work for the intellectual, cultural, and spiritual renaissance of Bharat through his various initiatives. And I need to get the listeners used to this concept. So with Hari Kiranji, I'm going to start something new. I'm going to start a series of podcasts. And I'm glad that Hari Kiranji has agreed to do this. So we're going to be having a series of at least 3 to 4 podcasts where in every podcast, I'll pick up one subject and we'll have a detailed discussion about it. And then we'll connect it to the next and then we'll connect it to that. So today's podcast is going to cover a subject which you guys will eventually know about if you're going to listen to it. So welcome to the podcast, Hari Kiranji.
Thank you very much, Kushal. Very honored to be on the podcast, and this is probably the first time I'm actually talking about the work that I've been doing in the last few years. So thank you very much for having me.
So Hari Kiranji, I want to the first question I want to start with is, we'll get into the details of what you're doing and how how you're going about doing the things that you are doing. But first things first, why, what made you decide to take these various initiatives that we're going to discuss in the next segment or in the coming segments of the podcast? So what was happening in your head when you decided, bhai kuch karna padega, something needs to be done? So let's start with that.
Well, actually, that's a good question. This is going back to I think 2000, 2010, 2009 or so. I am a follower of Vedanta philosophy, and I wanted to promote this philosophy. And I'm a student of Puja Swami Dayananda Saraswati. And what happened was that when I started trying to promote this, I came across that quite a few people were not recognizing the Indian spirituality or Indian philosophy, and actually taking away the essence of the Upanishadic wisdom and repackaging it and selling it as pop Vedanta and pop spirituality. And when I went deeper into this, then I found that this was a very systemic problem. That's when I started Advaita Academy in 2010, just basically to promote spirituality. And then when I discovered more and more, then I realized that something needs to be done at the intellectual level. And then, I said that, look, something needs to be done at the intellectual level also. That's at the academic side, as well as in the public intellectual space. And in 2015 was when we set up Indic Academy. So my first initiative was Advaita Academy in 2010. And in 2011, I set up Creative India Academy, which was basically to promote art and culture. And in 2015, I set up Indic Academy. And basically, the entry point for me was the distortions that were taking place we saw as far as Vedanta was concerned. And so somehow that angered me a lot, and then I wanted to do something about it.
Okay, now you just mentioned about some specific critiques or attacks or on Vedanta. Could you elaborate on what exactly were the were those critiques that actually angered you a lot?
Actually, there was no critiques as such. They were actually the appropriation that. So basically, in my mind, Adi Shankaracharya is the greatest human being and the greatest philosopher. Uh, so, so when I found that he is not even recognized, and then you have a lot of people recognizing Buddha and sort of conflating a lot of Adi Shankaracharya's ideas with Buddhism, and that's when it struck me that basically there's a negative attitude towards Hinduism that is quite deep, and whatever good of Hinduism and Hindu philosophy and Hindu spirituality is there, they just appropriate that and attach it to Buddhism, and that's what angers me. So basically, the non-recognition of the greatness of Vedanta is what angered me and brought me into this field.
You raise a very important point, and in fact, when I used to stay in the West, this was my experience too. When I used to live in the West, when it comes to the understanding of India or Indic philosophies or anything that comes from the East, Buddhism is sexy, and Hinduism is these weird people who keep worshipping idols, and they are obsessed with the cow, and the standard caricature of the Hindu is very weird in the West, while the standard caricature of Buddhism is very different, and I couldn't agree more with you. But why do you think this is there? I mean, at the end of the day, there are so many Indians who are living in the West, right? I mean, why is the image of India or Indic ideas still very I don't know what word should I use, but in Hindi we could say बड़े पिछड़े हुए व्यक्ति की एक image है. Why do you think that is happening?
I think till the 70s and probably the 80s, the image was not so bad. It was very popular. You had Beatles coming in, and you had a lot of Mahesh Yogi was doing a great job. A lot of Indian spiritual masters who went to the West actually conquered the West. I mean, starting from Swami Vivekananda. So there was no negative opinion about Hinduism at that stage. I think the inflection point is probably the 90s, when the whole subaltern studies from India that reached the academics, and I think the scholars from the humanities from India also started coming onto the Western academic fold. And so there were confluence of factors, I guess, but the real negative Hindu image really took a serious dip from the 90s, and I think this is largely due to the academics and the way they distorted the popular thing. So that's why there is this move. So they couldn't control yoga because yoga is the most popular thing in the West, and so therefore that they want to say no, yoga is not here. So the yoga is not Hindu is again a invention of these academics. So anything that is good, either it is not Hindu, Ayurveda is not Hindu, yoga is not Hindu, or the Vedanta philosophy is actually inspired by Buddha, from Buddha, and and removed and distorted so much without giving credit that and the whole bashing is on our caste system, and regressive nature, patriarchy, and all that memes that they have created. So all this is the last, I would say, 30 years. Till 80s, I think we had some great people going there, and there was a great impact.
Okay, so today's focus, how about this? So today's podcast, we can actually classify it as where we try to understand the problem. Okay,
Right.
so
So,
when we say understanding the problem, we can start with three broad layers, which were actually kind of we've touched upon. Obviously, we touched upon the academics. I want you to get more deeper into it when you say the academics and the media and the NGO spectrum, which is the whole the left of center to the far left.
so yeah, sure. So basically, I'm using the word intellectual Kshatriya. As you know, this phrase has been mainstreamed by Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji. And whatever sort of, you can say these frameworks are all synthesis of some of the ideas of Rajiv ji and David Frawley, Conrad ji, of the current people, and the previous, you have Arun Shauri and you have Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup of the previous generation. So the framework that I am presenting today is a sort of synthesis of all the works. The originality of this framework is in the form. So I just wanted to clarify that. So when I say getting rid of Hindus, I mean that's a very powerful statement to make, that the world is different. Different agencies and different factors are contributing to the world getting rid of Hindus. So so when I make that statement, I use that with what shall I say, with great sense of responsibility, and I do believe that's what's happening. And when I say rid, I use it as a short form of rights, identity, and demographics. So when I talk about rights, and if you look at that particular segment in the chart, it's basically the government of India and the constitution that we have drafted from 50 that that has systematically ensured that Hindus are not equal to the other faiths. So we are, about Article 26 to 30, about the fact that, about the institutions, about RTE, about 93rd Amendment. And about so many of the factors in where the government has consistently discriminated against the Hindus in the way they have crafted the various laws. And that discrimination has led to a systematic deterioration of our ability to fight and ability to counter any attacks against us. So they have sort of disempowered us, so to speak. I mean, for example, the temple management issue, you are already aware that if temples are at the center of culture and then we contribute our money to the temples, the money goes to the government, but the money doesn't come back to culture and revival and our ability to protect. So that's where we have a big problem. On the other hand, that's the sort of discriminated against. On the other hand, they also do a significant amount of appeasement of the minorities. So all in all, the rights of Hindus are stifled, restricted by the government. So that's what that portion of that chart explains to you. One is discrimination and one is appeasement. On the other hand, on the left side, you see the religious groups, which I talk about, which is basically the demographics. So how are our demographics being affected? And that is, one is through persecution, and second is through proselytization. So that you have seen persecution in different parts of the country, where we are minorities, where Hindus are minorities in a particular location, in a particular district. There are any number of examples that are there to see how we are persecuted against. The obvious one of how we were driven away from our land in Kashmir is, readily comes to your mind. But there are so many examples in the borders of West Bengal, Assam, in Kerala. So you have that situation wherein wherever we are minority in a particular locality or a district or taluk, we are persecuted. On the other hand, proselytization has been an issue that we all are aware that they have exploited the fault lines and they do the conversions. And I come from a place called Guntur, and significantly in the last 2004 to 2014, it has been ravaged. I can see it because I grew up there, and I could, you could actually physically see the kind of presence that they have made during the UPA 1 and 2. So this is a very big problem, and one of the things that they do is surreptitiously, they don't even, because they want the benefits, so you want to have the cake and eat it too, so they want the benefits to remain, so they don't even announce. So they just say, hey, I'm converting you, but you know what, when the census guy comes in, don't tell him that you're converted. So, and of course there are a lot of ways in which they appropriate our festivals and appropriate all our they have the Jesus Sastranama and all those stuff. So that's a big industry out there. So there is a serious problem of demographics being affected that we see. But I, as a sort of an intellectual Kshatriya, I would not be in a position to do much about this, because this is what VHP and RSS and the larger social organizations that have a network, they are supposed to do this. They can do this. They're capable of it, because this requires village level activism. You have to ensure the Purohit is taken care of. You have to ensure that, there's so many factors there to prevent the demographic change. So that is really a ground level work that has to happen. And therefore, I am not in a position to do this. And on the other hand, you have these 26 and 30 and RT and all that. I mean, these things take time. The current government, there was a lot of hope that they would do something about it. But obviously, this is not on their agenda. Doesn't look like they're even, agitated about it. Because if they were, then at least they would talk about it, or at least they would set up a parliamentary committee to examine the efficacy of RDE or something like that, just to prepare the ground for amendments. They're not even talking about it. So we have a situation wherein if I focus on that, there's nothing that I can do. So what, as an intellectual, that I can do is fighting the battle at the identity level, which is a broader, larger battle that is happening. The effect of this, I must tell you that I call it as proselytization of Hindus into non-Hindus. Not Hindus into Christians, but Hindus into non-Hindus. So that's the effect, and I will explain that in a moment. So if you look at how this is happening, the ecosystem that has developed between a very nice ecosystem between the academics, the media, and the NGOs. What are they doing? They are assaulting my Hindu identity. And how are they doing that? One is they're distorting my identity. And second, they're appropriating my identity. So this is a cultural appropriation. This is what Rajivji calls as digestion. I am calling it appropriation without acknowledgement. So I'm happy if they do yoga, but they need to give me credit for it and acknowledge that this belongs to my faith. So there are two things that happen in my identity. One is so first it starts with the famous Aryan invasion theory. You've done podcasts on that. You know what I'm talking about. Then they talk about that it's not a continuous faith. Hinduism is a recent construct. Rajivji has again talked about it. So Vedic religion. This morning I was reading academic paper by Johannes. I think it's Johannes. So he was talking about Brahmanism, and this whole concept of Brahmanism is, I mean, so a very unfortunate creation. And again, this is basically their attempt to prove a discontinuity in my faith. So they don't want to acknowledge that I am there from the last 5,000 years, but they want to say, oh, there is something called Vedic religion, but you know what? Now then subsequently Buddhism and Jainism came off on their own, and then Brahmins came and appropriated Buddhism and Jainism, and then they manufactured this thing called Hinduism that you see today, which is not true. So when you do that, that's on the continuity side. On the other hand, they distort our identity in multiple ways. I mean, if you just go to last 3 years, if you just go to any of these new age digital magazines and just Google, they're at it. They say, Krishna is a tribal hero. I appropriated him. So the way the schemes that they come up with are fairly ingenious. So you must first and foremost appreciate your opponent, that they are very creative. I mean, you wouldn't even think, oh, Hindus are not, they don't treat physically challenged people properly, right? Suddenly somewhere it comes out, and then you have to counter it and understand where are you coming from. So they just keep, of course, about gender and how they talk about patriarchy and all that. So that's a bigger meme that we know about. But the point is that they are doing anything and everything in their power to do and destroy my identity in a manner that I don't feel proud of myself anymore. There is a documentary in the US called The Merchants of Doubt, where the lobbyists in Washington continuously talk about all the studies regarding smoking or any chemicals used or environment. They sort of create another report and then sort of create a doubt. So that documentary is called Merchants of Doubt, and I would urge you to see that. It's, I think, available on iTunes. But I would call these academics who do this as merchants of doubt myself, because that's what they do. They just create one doubt and just leave it out there and then keep repeating it, and then we are forced to sort of counter it. And that's the larger game that's happening. So it starts with the academic study and then the academic books. Then it filters into the media through different platforms that they have. And then using that and using the NGOs, you have the NGOs who file the PILs and stuff like that. So this ecosystem of academics and media and NGO are the ones who are consistently distorting our identity. And on the other hand, they would very happily say, oh, yoga is not Hindu. And we have some of our leaders also keep saying that. Yes, I mean, recently, Venkaiah Naidu ji talked about it. I really don't understand why we have to do this kind of stuff wherein, yoga is not Hindu. Of course, yoga is Hindu.
I have a question here. So you just mentioned this whole example of yoga is not Hindu, and I agree with you. It's a serious problem. This whole business of yoga is not Hindu. This is not Hindu. So anything that is good that comes out of the pantheon of Hindu thought, or whatever we want to call it, let us leave the semantics aside. But my biggest problem is the reaction to it too. I mean, if you look at the reaction from our side, most of the times it isn't a very informed reaction. It's not like somebody is thinking about it and then going back to the sources, taking out the examples. Like, I'll give you an example. The biggest rebuttal to this is the yogic posture in the Indus Valley civilization seals. I mean, I think I don't remember the exact yogic posture it was, but I do remember there are a lot of yogic postures. Or let's say There was a beautiful documentary which was about yoga and its entire history. I keep forgetting the name of the documentary. It was I've seen it. I've bought that documentary myself. Like, I have a copy of the documentary, and I'll in fact encourage everyone else to even buy the documentary. But when what I see in our side also, and we have to be, when we are talking about understanding the problem, I think a big part of the problem are we ourselves too. We are ourselves a part of this problem. This is my view. I could be wrong. People can say I'm wrong, but the response from our side has always been reactionary. It's always उन्होंने ये बोला, अभी हम react करेंगे. So what do you do with that?
No, actually, you see, on several of these issues, we have a serious discordance within our community. There's no doubt about it. Several of these issues, for example, even on Aryan invasion theory, there are some academics who talk about some bloggers who say no, there was in fact Aryan migration theory. So there are a lot of people who are there is discord. So for example, the other day there was a debate on about Hinduism and what are the scriptural basis for Hinduism, and then we had a discussion, and I said, look, it's the Vedas, so we are a Vaidika dharma. But then they said, no, the tribals didn't do it. That's not the point. The tribal, any discussion, as you see, as we move into the next slide, you will see that if there was a clear cut, we had a phenomenal history of debate, right? You talk about Cārvākas and you announce yourself as one, and if you look at the 6 darshanas, you see there was debate, right? So today, for us to say something saying that, oh no, without any reference to a debate is an unfortunate thing. But there's really nothing at this point that we can do, in the sense that there is no top-down approach. Everything is bottom-up. So it's a consensus building, and this is why I'm trying to put that into a graph there, to say that, look, it's okay to have certain differences. You might have differences, but the point is that there is a larger battle ahead. So stop this nuances. The nuances can be taken care of later, right? So it is a problem. So to answer your question, it is a problem. There is no answer to it, except it's just an evolutionary process by which some point in time there would be an answer.
Yeah, and I'm glad we have brought this topic up, because I'll give you my personal example. Now, I might be from a Cārvāka darshana. I might have serious disagreements with people from other darshanas. But when it comes to the overall, pantheon of Hinduism, I believe I'm part of it. I might have disagreements on certain things with other people, but I'm willing to let go of those disagreements, because I don't think so those disagreements are a deal breakers for me.
Exactly.
They are not deal breakers, at least in my point of view. But what I see in a lot of activism on the Hindu side also is there is this lack of openness. In fact, sometimes I believe Hindus do behave like Abrahamic people. I know it's going to rile a few people here and there, but I don't want to digress. So now, you were talking about the nexus between the religious groups, the academics, and the NGOs. Now, this is another question I wanted to ask you. You have to give credit where it's due. When they come up with an assault, that assault is very systematic. And it is very well thought of, planned, and they write so much literature on it. Let us assume that entire body of literature is rubbish, but at least they come up with a very well thought of way. So you have different levels in this, right? You have the pop culture level, where everything Hindu is denigrated in a very different way. Then you have the semi-intellectual level where there are people who are good book readers. They may not be good book writers, right? But they read a lot. They consume a lot of material, and then they go and they talk within their groups. And then there is the serious academic who does that. Maybe the NGO wala types. These are the people who read a lot and then they go and try and spread that. But where is that equivalent on our side? Do you see that thing happening on our side too?
Well, that's actually the matter for the third podcast. That's exactly what different people are trying, including myself. For example, Rajiv Malhotra ji now has 3 million followers on his Facebook, and he's been single-handedly fighting for the last couple of decades. Like that, you have several initiatives that are being taken by different people. Now, there is a serious problem we have because we don't have the resources. So we don't have. It goes back to we don't have any church kind of an organization that would fund us for these kind of activities, right? So, for example, I know in Guntur, one of the Purohits, they were converted, right? And he was told, and he said, look, we'll give you a retainer of 10,000 rupees a month. And then wherever, an Indian god's name is there, just replace it with Jesus. So he is getting 10,000 rupees retainer, plus his, and so their entire thing is so well funded and orchestrated and thought through that, the person who is converted doesn't have any dissonance, and he's not really culturally shocked because he's still hearing the Purohit reading out the same thing and stuff like that. So this requires a massive funding. During UPA time, I think almost 10,000 crores a year used to come. We are nowhere near that. I mean, we just don't have any resources. So you have lone warriors fighting this battle, putting their own money and trying to fight this. So this is a battle that the government should assist, and larger organizations like Hindu organizations should assist. But it's not there. That's how it is. So I mean, we need to be smart about it and learn about it, learn how to deal with it.
Or maybe the money is there, but the money is in the hands of the government because they don't get rid of their control over the temples. Don't you think if the Hindu temples were free, we would get a lot of money to actually systematically fight these battles? See, we don't need to have one big behemoth fighting it, right? We can have a decentralized structure where every darshana or every temple with its own funds, which are significant in itself, go about fighting it. But here the problem in India is that we have this big government organization, that controls the Hindu temples exclusively. Every other faith is free to do their own thing, and we hardly get any money to fight various problems in the country. It's not just that. I mean, in my last podcast with Dr. Amit Thadani, Amit was telling me that one of the best hospitals run in the country are run by say Bhakti Vedanta or Hindu religious trusts or Jain trusts, for that matter. So don't you think this is deeply connected? I mean, we are in the process of understanding the problem in this podcast. So don't you think a major chunk of that problem is that the money isn't there, and where the money is there, the government sits on it like a big samp and doesn't get rid of its control. And here I have to criticize BJP, because I don't care. I know most of my listeners are BJP voters. I am also a BJP voter, by the way. So now a lot of BJP leaders also sit on the temple trusts. It's not like they're not there in the temples too.
No, actually, see, the problem is that this is a political party, by its very definition, is only focused on the next election. So it'll do everything and anything in its power to win the next election, and that's all there is. And so if they feel that this is not an issue that will win them the next election, they're not focused on it. So therefore the government, so there is a fundamental problem that we have. I'm not sure when we are going to ever solve that. So there is, but I'm not despondent. I mean, the kind of support that is there now, thanks to the extreme steps that it's getting very obvious now. Earlier, the previous generation, all this was very subtle. Now they made it into one very gross form of, very, very gross. I mean, it's just in your face. You Hindus, I hate you, and this is what I'm going to do to denigrate you. That's kind of a thing. If you look at any paper, look at, any of these hate trackers and all that, it's pretty obvious now. So people are smart and they're willing to put in money and trying to protect themselves. And that trend is happening. So I am sanguine. I'm not despondent.
And one point I wanted to know your views on, because so just for the listeners, the image of this podcast is going to be a infographic, and we're basically, what we're discussing is this big infographic. So you guys, when you actually listen to the podcast, you just have to look at the display image and you'll see an infographic. But I wanted to add one aspect in this thing, because one of the points you have mentioned, Hari Kiran ji, is the rights aspect, and what rights do we have now. I think this is where the entire Hindu movement has been neglecting, or has been negligent completely, is the freedom of expression aspect. Now I'll give you an example. I have read the Quran, I have read the Bible, I have read various other texts in Hinduism also. Now in India we have a very weird law on free speech, thanks to Nehru, where criticism of religion is not allowed. Now I know a lot of Hindus are using 295A, I think 156A, and they are trying now. I was one of them, by the way. If anyone is guilty, I am the first one. I used it too, but that was a very short-term knee-jerk reaction from my end to actually get somebody talking about it. You're not going to win this battle by suppressing the other side from criticizing Hinduism. It's just not going to happen, because if they just have to open up the Quran, which says the idolater is to be murdered, and they are absolutely protected under the free speech laws because that is part of a religious text. So Hindus are going to lose this battle until and unless they don't have free speech in this country. Now, don't you think that this aspect of free speech is highly neglected? Because when we are saying we are trying to understand the problem, the first step in the problem is when you are allowed to talk about any issue absolutely freely. Do you think we are winning that battle in India at least?
I'm not so sure that at this point that is so much of an issue. I just want to lead you into that into the second graphic there, and then we'll talk about them. If you just see, I've classified the Hindus into different categories, right? And the first, so what is happening is that the academics, media, and NGO are basically, I would equate them as the regressive or the alt left, right? Above that, you see the aggressive Hindus, right? And then, so I'll just quickly run through it and we'll come to define. Then the practicing Hindus, the occasional Hindus, the closet Hindus, the intellectual Kshatriyas, the ambivalent Hindus, the spiritual but not religious Hindus, the progressive or social justice warriors, and then the regressive, right? So this is my classification. I'll just walk you through. So when I talk about the aggressive Hindus, I mean exactly those people like who are what you just quoted on the FOE. For example, they would be the ones who would go to a Mangalore pub and on a Valentine's Day and attack the pub, right? Or they are the ones, or the violence that we have seen on Gaurakshaks. So a lot of that Hindus who are not allowing FOE would fall under that bucket. The next one is the practicing Hindus, the normal Hindus who don't really think so much about their identity, and then they just practice their faith. And then you have the occasional Hindus who are, I would say that, like people who, because of the lack of joint family system anymore, and who have moved to the urban areas. Uh, so you are only practicing your faith on festivals, for example, right? So you're an occasional Hindu. On a regular basis, you're not really connected with your faith. A closet Hindu, again, would be somebody who is an intellectual who has understood his identity and he believes in his identity, but he doesn't want to really come out and fight for his identity. He's just practicing and he's an intellect, but he's really not fighting for it. And then, of course, we know who the intellectual Kshatriya is. The other three categories are the ambivalent Hindus. The ambivalent Hindus, I would say, the Hindus who are now being assaulted by these alt left and who are questioning their identity, they still not have made up their mind. They have still not said, but they're constantly being assaulted. Oh, Diwali, or any of these festivals, any of these things that they read. So they are just in a doubtful phase there. The next phase is the spiritual but not religious, because there they have progressed and said that no, I'm not at all ritualistic, I'm not religious, but you know what, I'm spiritual. I like Dalai Lama very much. I have to go for my Buddhist chanting classes in the evening at 6 o'clock. Those kind of people who are into yoga and all that stuff. But basically they say that, oh no, we don't do rituals, right? Or they attend rituals like as a tourist and with a sense of as an observer rather than as a person who is participating in the rituals with a sense of faith. The last one category is the progressive Hindu. These Hindus are the people who are, whenever there's an issue between Hindu faith and the minorities or the other Abrahamic faith, their first thing would go to the other side. So they would support automatically. So there's a sense of liberalism, there's a sense of being a Mahatma, there's a sense of being non-partisan that is ingrained in them, that they want to be seen on social media, that they are protecting, oh, we must protect the minorities, oh, it is their right to wear a burqa, that kind of stuff. So these are social justice warriors, and you see these kind of people all over in America also. Equality, all that, all the jazz that they come up with. So they basically are no longer, they're not even spiritual but not religious. They're just, whenever there's an opportunity to cuss us, they cuss us, and then they have to protect the minorities. They think that it's their right to protect them. That's the segment. Then, of course, the regressive left is they hate Hindus. I mean, that's what you see in the Marxist Party, in a lot of media people, you see that. So this is the framework for understanding the different types of Hindus that are out there. And then what you see is that the regressive left, the academia, the media, and NGOs systematically target. And who is their target? Who is their customer? And if they're looking at it like a product that they're doing, okay, let me destroy the Hindu identities, and that's their target. Who is the customer? The customer is the occasional Hindu, the ambivalent Hindu, and the spiritual but not religious. Those are their customers. So slowly what happens is that these guys become, they progress from being an occasional to an ambivalent, from an ambivalent to a spiritual but not religious, and from a spiritual but not religious to a progressive social justice warrior. From a social justice warrior, they become regressive. That's the last. So that's the migration, that's the sort of a progression of an occasional Hindu into being a regressive left. All that is happening today on about our identity is this is the market that they're looking at, and converting this market, converting these Hindus into non-Hindu. So that's the bigger problem. So there's a proselytization of Hindus into Christians that's happening. That's a different problem. There's a proselytization of Hindus into non-Hindus, into progressive Hindus or regressive Hindus that's happening, which is a 30-year project of a systematic denigration of our identity. There are 1,000 cuts, so it's a battle of 1,000 cuts. So there's a very systematic thing that's happening. So that's the problem that we as intellectual Kshatriyas should understand that this is the problem, that this is the identity problem that we are fighting. And then if you go to understanding our response, I again use the framework of a Chaturvarna in the sense that there are four types of people that you can be. One is you can fight them through an academic and become an academic, or you can write, or you can do something creatively, or you can just be an activist and help others who are doing other stuff. So these are the four things that you can think of if you are an intellectual Kshatriya. Now, so now the thing is that if you go to the last one and are saying that okay, this is my target and this is my thing that I need to do, there are some people who are naturally inclined for promoting. They are not into fighting, right? So they can create, like for example, Amish Tripathi. He writes wonderfully and he is bringing out books. So there are a lot of people who write, and that is divorced or independent of the fighting. So that's just pure promotion. Whereas people like Rajiv Ji and people like Conrad, there are a lot of people who are protecting, right? So that's what they're doing. So when they counter the narrative, the propaganda, and rebut, that's what they're doing. So you have a choice. If you are going to wanting to fight for your Hindu identity, you must understand who is your target and understand what is the path that you're taking. Do you want to take the countering path? Do you want to take the promotion path? Do you want to be an academic? Do you want to be an author? Do you want to be an artist, or do you want to be an activist? So this is what the framework that you need to develop and target. So once you're clear on this, then you can say, okay, I want to promote. Then what do I do? So then I can make short videos on Hindu culture or Hindu festivals, and I can promote that if I'm an artist, right? And if I'm an artist and if I'm a creative person, but I want to counter, like my friend Ashish, he makes these lovely songs against the left, and that's also an artistic way of countering the propaganda, right? So you if you see, you have to think in your mind, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you're capable of? Where you're capable of promoting, capable of countering, and what are you? Do you want to become an academic, an activist, an artist, or an author? So that's the framework that I work on, and uh, yeah. So this is basically just to put together understanding the problem of the Hindus face in terms of how the government and the religious groups and the academia and the ecosystem do, how they are going about it, what can be our response, how shall we formulate our response.
All right, perfect. So I think so we've pretty much covered all the angles of understanding the problem. Now, I just had one last question on because I wanted to touch upon this one aspect of the chart where I think we need to chat a bit about the demographics. Now, this is a very dicey one. Again, the problem is the response from the Hindu side sometimes is hilarious. Ki, even I agree, demography is destiny. I mean, if you're not there in the numbers game, you're out. It's game over for you. And I think I wanted to touch upon it in the last segment of the podcast. So sometimes the response from the Hindu side is, I don't want to take names, but yeah, Hindu women should have 5 to 10 kids too. I mean, I thought a Hindu is also someone who cares about the environment, the freedom involved, and all those things. So, how do we solve the demographic problem without sounding like a lunatic? Do you have a view on that?
You cannot do that. You cannot solve it like that. That's not the way to do it. I don't think so. We can see it's an individual choice. I mean, Hinduism is about the individual. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's ultimately only about the individual, about his inquiry and about his life. You look at Purushartha, with Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. All this is only about the individual and his progression, right? It is the most liberal faith, and therefore there cannot be any that kind of aspect saying that look, I'm going to have, I need to have more children. Uh, that's I think outrageous proposition.
All right, so now a message to the listeners. So this is going to be 3 podcasts, guys. Like I had mentioned somewhere, I think around 10-15 minutes in the podcast. So today what we've covered is understanding the problem. We are going to call it understanding the problem. So what we have tried to do is we have identified certain sectors or within our society and certain aspects on and the different players in it. And which player does that? And I believe Hari Kiranji has done a wonderful job in explaining that. Now, in the next segment of the podcast, what we'll try to do is Hari Kiranji touched upon it, the different type of Hindus. But I think we need to actually dissect it, open it, and really talk about these different types of Hindus in a much more detailed manner. There is this whole lot of virtue signaling Hindus. It's like, I know Hari Kiran ji will not like what I'm going to say right now, but this is, I call them the I want to get laid Hindus.
So why would you think that I wouldn't like that? Go ahead.
No, seriously, a lot of these, and I'm going to touch about, I'm going to share because I have a lot to say in this aspect.
Please,
What types.
yeah, go ahead.
So there is this horde of people online, and it is all done to impress. So what? And I believe the left ideology works a lot on moral shaming. The ideology of the left is how to morally shame the other side. That look at you, you piece of garbage. You don't care for the minority. I mean, I don't get it. I thought everybody was equal in the eyes of the creator, or in my case, in the eyes of the law. That's how I look at it because I have no creator in my case, some divine entity. When we are all equal, and then the whole premise of a minority majority just collapses. And this is this is a very important thing, guys. Think about this. What type of a Hindu are you? I'm not saying what is good, what is bad. I'm leaving the judgment aspect aside. But every time when you have a problem with something that's bad in your society, and believe me, I'm someone who criticizes a lot of problems in India. But where are you coming from? Are you the I want to get laid Hindu? Or are you I genuinely care for my society Hindu? Think about it. Anyways, we'll take it up in the next podcast with Hari Kiranji. So, Hari Kiranji, thanks a lot for doing this. I was really after your life, and I know you were like, "Main kyo karun ye?" And I'm glad I could force you to do this. So, I'm really grateful, and I hope that people who listen to this post that they actually start thinking about some of these things too.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm deeply impressed with your with the kind of effort that you're doing. You have done almost 30 podcasts so far. A lot of with friends of mine, and it takes a lot of patience, and I really appreciate it. And it's been an honor. I mean, this is the first time I'm actually talking so much about the kind of issues that agitate me and engage me. Thank you so much for having me. Bye bye.
Bye.